Taurus never explicitly asks for a sign. Taurus waits for the proof to arrive first, and only then, very cautiously, begins to believe that perhaps it is real. So let me ask you something before we continue. What if the signs that God is placing someone in your life had already passed you by 2, 3, 4 times, and you simply hadn't given them the credit they deserved because they didn't come wrapped up the way you imagined they needed to? There's a simple image that explains almost everything about this mechanism. A seed doesn't need the first rain to begin to exist. It was already there, inside the earth, long before any cloud formed in the sky. The rain doesn't create the seed. The rain only reveals what had already been planted. And that's exactly how it usually works when someone appears in a way that seems too sudden to be a coincidence, but which is actually just revealing something that had already been prepared, silently, long before any visible encounter took place. The first sign is the hardest to accept because it doesn't ask permission to arrive. It's a peace that appears before any rational certainty. The body relaxes before the mind authorizes it. There's a specific kind of silence that settles in a house when the right person enters for the first time, even if no words have been exchanged yet, even if nothing has been promised, even if there's no logical reason for that feeling of rest. And that's precisely where the discomfort lies. Taurus tends to distrust the very peace they didn't ask for, because they've learned all their lives that true security only comes after much effort, never for free, never easy, never just like that, out of nowhere. The second sign appears in an even more subtle way, almost disguised as chance. It's repetition, a name that reappears in different contexts, an encounter that repeats itself in places that shouldn't cross paths again, a coincidence that, alone, wouldn't mean anything, but which, added to 3 or 4 others, begins to draw a pattern impossible to ignore. It's like a trail that forms in the earth. The first steps leave no mark, but after the same feet pass along the same path repeatedly, the trail becomes visible. And suddenly, everyone can see the path that has always been there, just waiting to be recognized by those who insist on looking at the ground instead of looking ahead. And there is a third sign, perhaps the most unsettling of the 3, because it doesn't arrive as comfort. It arrives as exposure. It's the person who, without any intention to hurt, touches exactly the places where Taurus protects itself most. Not out of malice, out of genuine closeness. A stone only reveals its inner veins when it is cut, never when it is merely observed from afar, admired from the outside, kept at a safe and comfortable distance. And Taurus's most immediate instinct, when faced with someone who sees too deeply, is usually to retreat, close up, protect what still hurts, interpret that exposure as a threat, as danger, as something that needs to be neutralized before it hurts again, as it has hurt before. But is that really what's happening there? Or is Taurus confusing invitation with invasion simply because it never learned the difference between the two, between the pain that came to destroy and the pain that comes only to open space, between someone who comes to take something away and someone who comes to show where there is still a place that is too closed off, too guarded and hidden inside? From within, that place that doesn't always have a name, but that reacts before any logical explanation can reach it. This question has been nagging at me for a long time, because I too have confused invitation with invasion. I too have retreated from good things just because they seem too close, too true, too real to be trusted. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose doesn't talk about waiting for signs from the outside to then believe. It talks about recognizing the solidity that Taurus already carries within and using that same solidity in favor of one's own life, instead of turning it into a wall. For those born under this sign, there is a huge difference between building security to protect oneself and building security to flourish. And this material shows where that line is, with simple language, without empty promises, just clarity about what you already feel, but haven't yet been able to name. If you recognize this pattern of holding back from good things, perhaps the reason isn't a lack of signals at all, but rather an excess of accumulated caution, and this can be worked on now, while that feeling is still alive, before routine stifles that rare clarity again. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. Now tell me in the comments, when was the last time you held back from something good just because it seemed too good to be true? From you. Because there's a mechanism within Taurus that does two things at once, and that's what's so confusing. It protects and sabotages in the same breath, almost without a break between one thing and the other. It's like a fence built to keep predators away, but which, unintentionally, also prevents the entry of those who are coming to bring food. The fence doesn't know how to differentiate between threat and sustenance. It only knows how to close. It has been trained over the years to respond the same way to everything that approaches too quickly, and that's exactly the most common blind spot in Taurus. The momentary inability to distinguish between what needs to be kept outside and what should have been invited inside a long time ago. Think about how many times this same mechanism has appeared in small, almost invisible ways before manifesting in a major life decision. An invitation refused for no real reason. A conversation interrupted before reaching a point that was too sincere. A silence chosen at the exact moment when a sincere word could have changed everything. None of these moments seems important on its own, but added together, they form the same picture. Someone who has learned to survive by closing doors so well that now they even close the ones that should remain open. How many times has a good person been treated with the same distrust reserved for someone who has caused past pain? How many times has prudence become a disguised excuse, an elegant way of saying no without having to admit that the real reason was fear, not wisdom? It's not weakness to feel this fear, it exists for a reason. At some point in life, someone confused trust with naivete, and Taurus learned the hard way that opening up too much is costly. But protection that is never reviewed, adjusted, updated for the present ceases to serve life and only serves fear. And fear alone never builds anything, it only prevents. It prevents the fall, but it also prevents the flight, and it pushes back any chance of a fresh start that even remotely resembles an old pain that should have already been overcome. Perhaps that fence you built has already served its purpose a long time ago, and perhaps it needs adjustment, not demolition. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose exists precisely for this, to help Taurus recognize when protection has become imprisonment, when the same instinct that should guard what is good has begun to push away what is good as well. It's not about lowering your guard, it's about learning the difference between what still threatens and what already deserves trust. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's a simple question that separates those trapped in this cycle from those who finally break free. Does this person before me need to be tested again? Or have they already proven themselves enough and I just haven't wanted to admit it yet? Because there's a huge difference between healthy prudence and an endless demand for evidence that will never be sufficient no matter how many times it's presented. A given and ignored proof doesn't translate into trust. It just becomes another accumulated race in a pile that never reaches the top, because the top, deep down, was never really the goal. The goal, without Taurus realizing it, has become to keep testing, so they never have to truly take a risk. There's a silent trap in this behavior, and it's subtle precisely because it disguises itself as responsibility. Nobody calls it fear. They call it caution, common sense, learning from the past. And in part, that's true. But there's a precise point where caution stops protecting and starts hindering, and that point is usually silent, without warning, without sirens. It simply pushes real life into the background, while the tested, postponed, always under analysis life occupies the place that should belong to the life truly lived. There is a difference between a question that seeks clarity and a question that only seeks postponement, disguised as responsibility. The first has a deadline, a purpose, and truly wants an answer. The second repeats itself indefinitely, always finding a new reason not to conclude anything, because concluding would mean needing to act, and acting would mean giving up the total control that doubt, however uncomfortable it may be, still guarantees. An anchor only fulfills its purpose when it is finally released into the water. While it remains attached to the deck of the boat, however strong, heavy, or well-constructed it may be, it holds nothing, protects no one, serves absolutely no purpose other than to occupy space and weigh down the person carrying it without ever using it. There is something profoundly ironic in this. The same quality that would make Taurus an extraordinarily loyal, present, and constant partner is the same quality that, trapped too tightly within him, prevents him from even beginning. The solidity that should sustain a bond ends up being used only to sustain his own resistance to creating that bond. The same solidity that Taurus uses to shield himself is precisely the solidity that, when given, transforms into an unwavering commitment. The paradox is this: to stop testing the evidence in order to finally receive it. Stopping testing doesn't mean stopping discerning. It means stopping demanding guarantees that no living person can fully provide. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose works precisely on this transition. How to use the solidity that already exists in Taurus to support something new, instead of using it only as a wall against the new. It's a resource designed for those who have already noticed the pattern of over-testing and want, finally, to learn to let go of the anchor. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's a broader interpretation behind all of this, and it has to do with a specific way of understanding how God tends to act in the life of a Taurus. He rarely forces a door. He prepares the ground beforehand, patiently in advance, just as an orchard doesn't bloom overnight, but follows a specific season, a process that cannot be rushed without spoiling the fruit. No one plants a tree and expects fruit the following week. The earth has its own rhythm, and those who work with it learn sooner or later that forcing the process only delays the result, never truly accelerating it. And prepared ground is undoubtedly the language that Taurus understands best, because it is an earth sign, because it trusts what can be touched, cultivated, closely monitored over time. Taurus has never placed much trust in empty promises. It trusts in roots, in soil, in something it can touch and feel is real, and perhaps that is precisely why the most important spiritual signs in Taurus's life never arrive like a bolt from the blue. They arrive slowly, almost imperceptible at first, accumulating like layers of earth that only after a long time reveal themselves fertile enough to sustain something great. No important root becomes visible on the very first day it is planted. And perhaps this explains why so many Taurians, looking back, realize that the answer they've been asking for years has been there for longer than they'd like to admit. Not because time deceived anyone, but because recognition always comes a little after the preparation, never before. It's hard to accept that something so important was there, quiet, waiting, while attention was focused elsewhere, busy testing precisely the thing that already deserved trust. If the ground has already been prepared with such care, What else is needed for Taurus to recognize the harvest that is already before their eyes? Perhaps all that's missing is permission. Permission to believe that this time there's no need to distrust what arrived too easily, too soon, too good to be true, because not everything that arrives like that is a trap. Sometimes it's exactly the opposite. It's the answer that has been silently building for longer than Taurus can perceive by only looking at the present. And perhaps that's the hardest part to accept, that something so important could be ready without having to fight, prove, test, or suffer for it beforehand. There's a scene that often repeats itself in the lives of many Taurus natives, almost always without them noticing the pattern as it unfolds. It's the moment when someone simply, without drama, without grand pronouncements, demonstrates through small, constant gestures that their presence is not fleeting. It's not the intensity of the beginning that proves anything. It's the quiet repetition of the simple gesture, day after day, without demands, without haste, without requiring immediate reciprocation. And it is precisely this discreet constancy, this patience that asks for nothing in return, that tends to be the most reliable sign of all, even though it is also the easiest to miss, because it doesn't come wrapped in any kind of spectacle. If the groundwork has already been laid, all that's missing is permission to harvest, and that permission begins by recognizing your own inner abundance before waiting for any external proof. That's exactly the proposition of the divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose. To show that the security Taurus seeks outside already exists in another form within themselves, and can be used as a basis for recognizing what is true without needing more time, more proof, more waiting. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. And this is where everything falls into place. Acknowledging something doesn't require haste, it requires presence. Taurus can continue being who they've always been, firm, cautious, loyal to the core, without needing to transform that firmness into a door locked forever. The root already sustains the entire tree long before any fruit appears to the outside eye, and perhaps this is the most honest image of everything said so far. You don't need to rush what is already sustained from within. The signs that God is placing someone in your life don't demand euphoria or absolute certainty at first. They only ask that you stop demanding impossible proof to acknowledge what, deep down, you already feel is true. Think for a moment about how many times in your life you've only recognized the value of something after it was too late to fully enjoy it. This is the silenced trap of caution taken to the extreme. It protects against the pain of making mistakes, but it also robs you of the chance to get it right at the right time. It's not about abandoning the discernment that makes Taurus so reliable. It's simply about learning the difference between discerning and delaying, between protecting and paralyzing, between waiting for wisdom to arrive and simply being too afraid to move. And if you stop now and revisit the 3 signs from the beginning, you might realize that they never arrived alone. The peace that appeared before any certainty, the repetition that formed a pattern too clear to be chance, the person who, without any intention to hurt, exposed exactly the most guarded place within you. The 3, together, tell the same story from different angles, that something was already being prepared even before you realized you needed it. They are not isolated pieces of evidence that require more skepticism. They are layers of the same terrain, revealing themselves little by little, in the right measure, at the rhythm that only the earth knows how to follow. There's no formula that guarantees the exact moment when each person will recognize this in themselves. Each Taurus has their own rhythm, their own season, their own history of protection that needed to be built for good reasons before needing to be reviewed. But there is something in common among those who finally go through this process. The feeling of relief, almost physical, of no longer having to carry alone the weight of deciding everything based on distrust. It's like finally releasing a muscle that has been tense for so long that the person no longer remembers what it was like to truly relax. And when that peace is finally received without distrust, without testing, without offense erected out of habit, it ceases to be merely an isolated sign and becomes, in fact, the beginning of something real, built with the same solidity that has always been the most beautiful mark of those born under the sign of Taurus. Not as a prison, as a root that, unlike a wall, doesn't prevent anything from entering, but ensures that when someone finally enters, they will find something firm enough to last beyond the initial enthusiasm, beyond the first doubt, beyond any test that may have once seemed too necessary to be dispensed with.